Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here for our Miami Project Call Kickoff webinar. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. There is both a Q&A and a chat feature. Depending on which version of Teams you have, you may be able to access just the chat. You may be able to also access the Q&A. But as we are going through with our presenters here, feel free to put questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we will address them as they come up or at the end. With that, I will pass it over to Cole Miller and Ben DeMarco to go ahead and talk about the Miami project. Cole, Ben, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Zane. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you joining this call. My colleague, John Martin, our AM Research Director, was not able to make it today. He's on business travel, so I'm filling in for him. And I'm going to introduce some of my government colleagues, and then we'll go ahead and get into the presentation. So I'll start with Evan Handler. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Evan Handler. I'm with the U.S. Navy out of Naval Surface Warfare Center Carteret Division. I am the Government Chief Technology Advisor for America Makes, helping to support my colleagues out of the Air Force Research Lab in facilitating the Institute and overseeing the technical direction, helping to set the direction of programs.
Thank you. Dr. Robin Villalba?
Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Villalba. I'm the Government Program Manager for America Makes. So I sit at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and I work for the Materials and Manufacturing Directorate and Air Force ManTech. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. And then to our JAMWIG colleagues, Miss Lisa Peters.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
My name is Elisa Peters. I support the Joint Additive Manufacturing Working Group at OSW R&E ManTech office. And short background, I was in the Air Force, and but I've been with the JAMWIG for 3 years, and so happy to be here.
Thank you. And last, Kate DeLeo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Elisa's coworker on the JAMWIG, and I'm the newest one to the team. I come from a more Marine Corps oriented background. Over.
All right, thank you to my colleagues supporting this. So we're going to go through this PowerPoint presentation. I would encourage you, if you haven't, I'll ask Zane or Cole to put it in the chat, to go through the RFP documents that are on our website. So there's an actual RFP document that is 39 pages long. A lot of this information should be in that RFP document. And as Zane mentioned at the end, we'll have a Q&A period where we'll open the channels for questions and answers. So Cole, if you could go ahead to the next slide. All right, so the DOW, as Lisa mentioned, the JAMWIG, Joint Additive Manufacturing Working Group, they've been working to prioritize the development of pedigreed material data sets for additive manufacturing process to accelerate and increase the speed at which we're adopting additive manufacturing and qualification and certification. We've had several efforts in the America Makes community, and so much so that we'll quickly just call out a few of them, but the JMAD data set, if you've heard of the JMAD, which is the Joint Metal Additive Database Definition, and another one, the GAMAT, the Generation of Additive Material Allowables. So these programs have been going on and been briefing the community for several years now. Some of them have closed out. Some of them have continued to add additional work. So but the thinking behind this is there's a framework for generating allowables, specifically for certain mechanical material properties, and those are used in our AM materials and specifically support the qualification and certification of hardware. Evan, if you want to talk about the MMT teams, and then we'll finish this slide out.
Sure. So for any of y'all who have been either tracking or involved in a lot of the NAVC supported and MIB/SIP funded efforts over the years, are probably at least somewhat familiar with the material maturity teams, the large efforts that we have had to generate the material data that NAVC needs to certify that the AM materials of choice are sufficient to meet the Navy needs that they are intended for. For anyone not familiar with these, there are 6 that are primarily cited that are relatively mature at this point. MIL 100S being produced with wire-directed energy deposition, a replacement for our traditional submarine hull steels. 7030 copper nickel being produced via DED and powder bed fusion. Commercially pure titanium being produced via wire DED. 316L in powder bed, and I am forgetting one, but if you Google it, it will almost certainly come right up. These have been different than programs such as JMAD and Gamut, which have focused on MMPDS style allowables and have instead focused on a very wide array of testing, including things like corrosion, shock testing, fracture toughness, and a number of other properties instead of just your standard tensile, fatigue, compression, and shear. The other 2 that I'm forgetting. Slightly different approach, but ultimately same end goal of being able to certify these materials for use.
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate that background. Yeah, so on this slide, we've shared a few examples, but there's been a lot of effort in this, and additive qualification is hard, and we're trying to overcome those challenges through programs like Miami. And again, this program will build on those programs and prior efforts, and specifically using some of the lessons learned. And I'll say there's artifacts that were produced in JMAD and other efforts that are in the distribution A that can be utilized even in your proposals, such as process control documents and things like that, that have already those that have gone before you have paved the path on some of these. But as Evan mentioned, they're looking at ways to replace traditionally manufactured components with a given AM or additive material. And then with that, what testing is required to show that the substitution of that part is okay with additive manufacturing. Go to the next slide, Cole. Again, so what I said in the last slide is kind of the first bullet point here is the proposers are supposed to show how the selected material or AM material manufactured alloy process combination can be used to replace one or more legacy alloys in the DOW, and with a focus on weapon systems components. The teams are encouraged and required in the phase 0 of the program to identify candidate parts and operating conditions, outline and provide performance requirements for those, and then generate and produce a shared data set proving that AM material meets or exceeds the critical properties of the traditional or the outgoing material that it's going to replace. The sub-bullet there, I'll just kind of touch on that, is looking for utility for broad application across platforms. And this helping our DOW colleagues in reducing the amount of testing and accelerate the qualification timeline. So think of that as well when you're preparing your proposal. Phase 1, so phase 0, phase 1, we'll talk more on the testing needed to show that the AM material meets those performance needs. And again, some of that testing is not often performed until the application requires it or demands it. And then therefore, a lot of that data is not shared by organizations, or it's not out in space that can be used by others. And there's a lot of duplicity, or a lot of organizations that are doing the same or similar testings of those materials. So the idea is we've Have we solved all the problems with JMAT or GAMET? No, but we've developed pretty large comprehensive data sets for TIE 6.4. I'll foot stomp at that and just say, now we're moving on to the next couple of data sets. But then I think the last bullet point is really important. When we think about the data sets that we're going to generate in these efforts, is how are teams going to use them, and how can the defense industrial base have a return on investment of those materials, and how can it be available or be able to be used in a broader scale for testing different components, validation, and adoption across DoW applications. Next slide. So I did walk through this verbally, and there is, if you go to, I think it starts on page 7 of the RFP, you'll start to see some of the requirements for phase 0, which is considered the planning, process definition, and the preliminary data phase. I won't verbatim read all of these bullet points, but they are all important to identify or select a process specification, a material spec, and a feedstock spec. I think often people skip this step and they don't consider, is my process well defined? Do I have controls to go produce the material through an additive process? Can I buy the material to a specific specification? When I finish making the material, does it meet those specifications? And then the last one is, feedstock. So consider those in your approach and identify those in your phase 0. This is an important, the second bullet point is the teams or proposers are required to write a report on whatever AM material that they selected and what actual components could be replaced with that material. I'm just going to give an example. This, maybe you have an engine system and it has 1,000 components, and you do a study of those 1,000 components, and maybe 25% of them are high temperature materials, and 25% of them are structural components, and 25% of those are another material or ancillary support or joining and hardware components. But the thinking is this report would help us, America Makes, and the community understand the process that you went through to select the material, and then what weapon system platform that you're looking at and how those materials would be leveraged, and what that material could be used like at scale for applications and parts. The third bullet point specifically talks about process control documents. Again, you can go in core, you can refer to the JMAD data set as well as their PCD that is out there on core. And then in phase 0, additionally, is the preliminary qualification testing and a set of published requirement documents that generate, like, okay, we can show that our PCD results at room temperature mechanical properties meet those required threshold or values for that AM material. Create a plan to demonstrate the PCD results in the material and how those would be used in other conditions outside of room temperature mechanical performance. And then the last one is within 30 days or prior to the completion of phase 0, that team should show a gate review with the government advisory team to review the phase 1 test plan and to determine the readiness to move on to phase 1. I think that's often something that gets overlooked. We say at least or within 30 days prior, but give that some thought in your schedule and make sure it's clear on how that review is going to happen. Evan, anything to add on to phase 0?
No, I think you've covered everything. The one thing I'll emphasize on the report of where the components could be used as a replacement or a substitute, or pick your right word. We do want that report to be shareable. So the expectation is that the highest control would be CUI distro D, shareable to the government and the DoD and contractors. Since I expect this will get questions, whatever data needs to come out of it that would get into the proprietary nature or be more than the selected performer is willing to share, we understand. But we do intend to have that, what is the material aiming to do? What are the components? What are the environmental limits that this material, the components made of it, need to live or to withstand? And we do want that shareable.
Excellent. Thanks, Evan. I appreciate it. So again, if you go through the RFP, there's additional input on the milestone reviews, specifically for phase 0 and phase 1. But if we look at phase 1, it's much less bullet points, right? It's go ahead and execute the test plan that you proposed in phase 0 and demonstrate that AM material is suitable as a substitute to the traditionally manufactured material. So less bullet points, but again, I don't want to state the importance of both phase 0 and phase 1 and how they have to work together. Next slide. 3 awards are anticipated for this effort, and the total amount per award is $4.15 million. There is a 50% cost share target. Proposers can provide additional cost share, but 50% is the targeted amount. And then for period of performance, again, for the large scale and scope and dollar value of this, it's a 33-month period of performance with 30 months for execution and 3 months for reporting. Teams can propose a shorter period of performance. Next slide. So we announced this at the end of April. Your proposal questions from all of those on the call or those that are listening to this must be submitted if they're not answered or discussed today by May 19th. The question and answer period ends on that day. Our government team and subject matter experts that support from the government on this will provide answers and will propose those to the website by the end of May 29th. If your proposal is going to contain proprietary information, you should, there's instructions in the RFP, but you should work to execute an NDA with NCDMM for submissions. And then additionally, there is the deadline for membership of June 16th for being a paid in full member. I think this is important. Maybe Zane, if you want to say a word or two on that. I think some teams have gotten to the end and then they skip this step. So Zane, if you want to say anything about the membership side.
Absolutely. So the member paid in full is specific to the scenario of somebody that is just joining the Institute. So if you're a, we'll call it veteran member, somebody that's been associated with the Institute membership for a number of years, this does not apply to you. But if you are somebody that's not currently a member and looking to join the Institute with the intent to be the lead proposer on this or any of the other project calls, if you go the member fee deferral method, i.e. the AT program MOU, then that does not qualify you as paid in full until you cover those dues. So for those first 12 months that you defer your membership payment for, if you wanted to be the lead proposer, you would have to either cover the difference between what you've covered so far via the AT program with cash contributions, or find other methods through the AT program to meet those membership fees that are due. So if anybody has any questions about that, I would be happy to hop on a call and answer them, but hopefully that gives everybody a pretty good overview of what the expectation is.
Excellent. Thank you, Zane. I appreciate it. Okay, and then the due date for submissions is July 9th. And then again, we put this as an anticipated date for decision as August 14th. Next slide, Cole. Cole, do you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing on this is just making sure that within your proposal, any team arrangements are identified, relationships disclosed. So just list out who's in your team. But specifically the two items that are bolded. So any use of assets, that being equipment, personnel, material acquisitions that you need from outside the United States need to be clearly identified within your proposal. And you can see listed out what you need to be provided. The reason is these have to be cleared by the Air Force Research Lab. So if they're in your proposal and you are awarded, they'll review and basically accept that when they review your proposal. It helps speed up this contracting phase. Lastly, we have a list of foreign nationals below. If you have foreign nationals from any of those countries, they will not be cleared to work on the project.
Yeah, and I think just for efficiency and speed, it's important, like Cole said, in your submission, if you have, you need to outline any use of equipment or personnel in your proposal. People skip this step and then it causes delay after the either selection or award. So it is important to include that information up front. Next slide, please. So Zane kind of already verbally mentioned this. The lead proposer, so the person that's actually the submitter, must be in good standing and paid in full by June 16th. Zane, if you want to go ahead and put the membership email where they can email questions. I know there's a link on how to join here. You can follow that, but as well as if you have membership specific questions, please submit those early and often. And then again, the cost share requirement for this is a 50% cost share. So if you ask for $1 of funding, 50 cents of cost share would be required. So a total scope of $1.50. Hopefully that is clear. We do get a lot of questions on the cost share aspect. Thank you. Next slide. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Zane. All right, so we do provide in the RFP specific minimum deliverables. This is a table format. So these are on pages 11 of the RFP. So please refer to those. And then there's additional reporting requirements on section 4.3, page 24. Go ahead to the next slide, Zane. All right, the last few times we've done these, I've tried to give a little bit additional context around how these are evaluated. So we give you a section in the RFP, section 4, and in this case, the technical approach and methodology is 40% of the score. The dissemination of the technology and both to America Makes members and the impact to the broader DoD is 25% of the score. How the team is going to manage the program is 30% of the score, and the cost is 5% of the score. I'm going to share my screen and interrupt you really briefly here, Cole, just so reviewers can see this, because I do think it's important. So again, if you go to the eval criteria, these are the criteria, these bullet points under tech approach that you will be evaluated on. So your proposal must address these. I will just say that sometimes, if you don't read these in your proposal, it may not score well. So it's important that you check these specifically for each section: tech methodology, tech dissemination and the supply chain, program management. Each of these have individual evaluation criteria. So I'll pass it back to Cole. I just wanted to point you all to these pages 23 and 24. You'll have to reshare, Cole. Next slide. Go ahead, Cole, on this one. You can take this.
Yep, real quick. We ask that your executive summaries just contain public releasable and non-proprietary information. And that's just so if we have to share that with anything through a media release or other partners, that we're not giving up any proprietary information. Real quick, the contract type is cost reimbursement, no fee. As mentioned in the other slides, your cover page should have your UEI and CAGE code. And then lastly, we ask teams to submit a signed subrecipient agreement. We understand that you may not be able to submit that type of contractual document without a notice of award. In that case, at a minimum, we just ask that you review the subrecipient agreement so that should you get awarded and our contracting team reaches out, you'll already be familiar with that in there, or you might even have red lines already marked on it. Again, this helps us speed contracting.
Questions? All right, Evan, we're going to go ahead and read these off. First question, can phase 1 testing and demonstration also include feature or part level demonstration beyond coupon level testing?
It might depend on the exact type of testing. But on First Street, I would think that would fit more in phase 2. But at the very least, it would be applicable for phase 2. Where necessary. I think the emphasis would be more if you need to include that sort of feature type testing to characterize specific performance of some geometry-based property.
Okay.
Wait, Evan, just to follow up on that, there is no phase 2 called out, right?
Sorry,
you're saying
phase 1, sorry, phase 0, phase 1. Yes.
so
Sorry,
you're saying by
issue.
saying phase 2, you're meaning like the phase 1 could have that then, I guess, right?
Yeah, origin problem on my part. Yes, phase 0 is the preliminary. Yes, everything works. Phase 1 is testing the test plan generated. Yes, under phase 1, this would be applicable.
Okay,
Sorry for
thanks.
confusion.
Yeah, and I would just encourage submitters or proposers, if you are going to do feature specific testing, that you highlight that in your proposal and your plan. I think sometimes that gets missed, and I think the importance of why that testing is required is important to be clarified in your submission. Good question. All right, next question. Can you provide examples of what you mean by moderately mature?
Examples might be a little bit harder to provide, but I'll say we are looking for materials where it is known to work, it is printable, you can achieve effectively stable material results that are in line with expectations. There is a requirement in the technical approach that there needs to be a minimum data set available. I think something along the line of S-basis. But this is not intended to be, hey, we have tried this nice new alloy. We're the only ones who've ever worked with it. That sort of alloy would be ineligible.
Okay. And I think if you were to go to page 7, there are a list of examples of materials that are deemed mature or have been already tested. So I think there are specific materials that are not of interest for this effort. Again, that's on page 7. So to kind of expand on Evan's explanation for the moderately mature, there have been definitions provided of what shouldn't be included. But otherwise, in your proposal, I think it should be explained why a proposer thinks that their material that they're proposing is mature enough for this effort. Okay, next question. More broadly, what alloys would be of interest given the list of alloys and processes not of interest focused? How does America Makes and DOW define the category 7XXX replacements or 7,000 replacements?
7,000 replacement. The inclusion of that one was because we currently have open the Gotham project call, which is similarly scoped to generate more along the lines of JMAD allowables for a 7,000 series replacement aluminum. So if you have one of those, I encourage you to go look at the Gotham project call and consider applying under that. The alloys of non-interest are effectively either A, where there exists enough public data and enough government data that we don't see the need being of this scale, whether that's an America Makes project call, whether that's something else that the government has licensed. JMAD and Gamut obviously being the big examples, but many of the materials on here also being either ongoing or previously executed, either America Makes or DoD executed efforts of similar scope. Anything else is within scope. With the one caveat, if there is something, I see there's a question, I think, on plasma arc Ti-64, where there's already an MMPDS allowable being generated. This list may be slightly incomplete, but that is, relative mature, not completely mature.
All right, next question is, it seems that the identifying candidate parts on DoW weapon systems, and in particular their operating conditions, boundary conditions, load cases, etc., will be a significant hurdle for most teams unless they are weapons manufacturers proposing against their own systems. Will you please comment on that expectation and any avenues through which non-prime proposers or small teams may use to identify parts and associated conditions? Good question.
Very good question. This one is scoped to enable more materials to be used for DoD applications. And based off of previous experiences within the NAVC and MIB work, the best way to understand what you need to test is to understand what it needs to live up to. And like I said, this is intended for DoD applications. Where there are platforms that would be sufficiently dual use, as an example, a gas turbine generator sees plenty of use in naval ships and power generation applications, or something along those lines. I think those could be considered in scope, even if they're not strictly speaking weapons platforms. I would also say, major subsystems of a larger platform. Think struggling to come up with a good example that I want to say in a public environment. Something sufficiently programmed on its own could also be considered, instead of obviously just take the whole of an F-35. But unfortunately, the goal for this program is to generate the needs of that testing based off of what the components it would be replacing are.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that question is, I think for this program and a few of the recent programs, we're seeing higher maturity levels and demands from our expectations and requirements and deliverables, and specifically operating environments and conditions. So I think it is important for even the small non-prime proposers or small teams to try to work to discuss or meet with some of those folks that are in those areas, or if they're customers, etc. And then additionally, I want to give a very specific example. There are times in our working groups these conversations are held at Distribution A, but we've had, in the materials working group specifically, we had a 1 hour session around corrosion. And I think that team came up with about 20, 25 conditions for applications for corrosion specific performance. And then additionally, we had a similar conversation around composites and applications in the composites additive environment. So if you aren't involved in one of the working groups, you can reach out. We can get you engaged. And I think a question, again, from the America Makes side, we can't participate in this kind of period of the RFP that is live, but I think those type of working groups, it can be discussed. And so I would just share that past experience for reference, because I think it was valuable. Those discussions were had specifically around some of those environments. And again, those were at the Distribution A level. All right. Anything else from my colleagues on the government side that they want to add on important conditions or non-prime proposers, or any input from those on the call before I move on to the next question? Okay, next question. Are Ti-6 LPBF and blown powder DED not of interest because America Makes funded allowables development programs? What about wire DED, specifically Norsk's plasma arc DED process, which became the first AM material allowables entry in MMPDS in 2025? The RFP seems focused on material allowables development. How would a proposal be viewed which already has a robust allowable data set that includes material testing, but focus more on transferability or demonstration with component level testing for both AM and raw products? Over.
So I think I sufficiently answered the first question. Yes, we already have we have substantial amounts of data on the program, or the materials already listed. And like I said, if there is already a substantial material data set out there, I would similarly say probably not of high interest. If there's already data out there for some parts of the material, but not all, if it's, there's a good bit of data, not MMPDS, and it's got no corrosion data out there, maybe. I think I would encourage the proposers to, detail what already exists, what else is needed, and, the applications they think aren't suitable. There isn't data to suitably certify the material for use in. But if it's already, effectively mature, and there isn't major data needed, this is a program designed to enable us to use more materials, not to demonstrate what's already out there. Over.
Evan, may I jump in with a clarifying question?
Sure.
So Norsk's Ti-6 data set into MMPDS is for bulk properties, as that's what MMPDS accepts data for. There are still gaps for broad qualification beyond MMPDS. Think high cycle applications for rotating parts, or elevated temperature parts and things of that nature. If material testing for broad qualification is part of the program, but there's already an existing static allowables data set as a base foundation, how would that be viewed?
Copy. I understand what you're saying. I would say, so maybe an inverse.
I would say yes.
Yeah, I'd say yes. The language is not of interest, not explicitly banned. If there is if there are substantial amounts of data that need to be generated, even if it is relatively commonly used in certain applications, I think those materials would be of interest.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
And
Okay.
the second part of the question, did you already address that in the response to Crosby?
Give me a second. The demonstration
Yes, sir.
question. Let me think on this one, and maybe we'll provide an answer in writing.
Yeah.
This is not intended to be a parts-based effort. It is more intended for, material testing, but where there needs to be specific considerations and testing for geometry-based features, I would say that is in scope. But let me chew on this one, and we'll provide a response in writing.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, I think just to reiterate that, we realize that there is some specifics to that come to certain materials and those limitations. But the bottom line that we kind of shared in the beginning is these data sets aren't readily available, and we're trying to build that out through these efforts. So I think I would just say, Evan, we'll follow up. We'll provide written comment on this, but at the end of the day, the phase 0 and the phase 1 are meant to kind of build the plan and create the data set. So, all right, next question. Would the expectation of a winning proposal be similar in length or detail to the RFP in terms of heavy focus on phase 0 and phase 1 being more of see above? Or maybe another way of asking, since Ben covered evaluation criteria, are each bullet point for evaluation applied to both phases separately or as a whole, or are some focused on phase 0 versus phase 1? I can take this one, Evan, if you'd like.
You go ahead.
Yeah. So we provide the background, why this is important. We give an overview of tech approach and tasking. And then we provide in section 4 how the proposals will be evaluated as a whole. So I think all of them need to be considered. And I wouldn't prioritize one phase over another, but instead build a total package for your submission. And they are graded as a whole and evaluated as a whole. So I know that hopefully that gives a little bit of context, but again, there's more bullet points under phase 0 than phase 1, but that doesn't mean that phase 1's not important. And I think this should be spelled out both in your technical response, your program management and plan on how you're actually going to execute phase 0 and phase 1, and then lastly, your budget. Realizing that budget expenditures throughout the period of performance in each phase. So I think, again, bottom line, it's the whole proposal. And section 4, the reason I show those evaluation criteria are a lot of times there are submissions and people miss that section. And I think, again, those that are reviewing from the government of these submissions, those are the questions that they have to go off of when they review your proposal. Next question. Is there any restriction of fusion-based additive only for this? Can solid-state additives such as friction-based be part of this?
I would say yes. As long as the process and its ability to make the intended material are relatively mature, have been demonstrated at least to some minimum level of viability, I would consider it in scope.
Thank you. All right, next question. I assume that the proposal is for both phase 0 and phase 1, but the detailed test plan for phase 1 is a phase 0 task. So the cost estimates for phase 1 must be general and may change, correct? Question mark?
Correct. my loose expectations may be strong, but what I suspect most folks will have, coming in and generating proposals, they'll have a loose idea of, we expect to need these sorts of testing. A reasonable estimate of this sort of test versus that sort of test versus costs and whatever it might be is expected in the proposal. But yes, it is expected that further investigation into the systems, into the needs, will change the scope of what testing needs to be done. If there is testing that was initially planned in a proposal that cannot be performed because of need for other testing or to validate against the environmental condition is prohibitively expensive. It is expected the project would document that that is a need that is not being fulfilled. There is no promise of follow-on funding if that is the case, but yes, if there are things that are identified that cannot be done for one reason or another, we do expect that to be the case.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately you make a proposal, you outline it based on the phases that we provided, phase 0 and phase 1. There may be feedback in the review where additional tests are either added or removed, those kind of things. Plans get altered. We understand that your proposal is an estimate. So I think in general, to answer that question, I agree with Evan that there is an opportunity, and we have one right now where they're finishing phase 0 and there's some input and there's some rescoping being considered based on tests and the requirements for certain things. We know more now than we did 2 years ago for additive. So I'll just say, yeah, I think when you make your proposal, make it clear of what tests are important for your specific material or your weapon system, and then why. And yeah, I think ultimately that's how the proposals will be reviewed and graded. Okay, next question. We have 10 minutes, just a bit of a time check. So I think we have 4 or 5 questions left. Does that mean non-commercial alloys are ineligible or not desirable? For example, alloys that are available to the market in powder or wire form, but currently proprietary to the material producer, i.e. not off patent. And Evan, if we want to talk about this, we don't have to answer it in the Q&A. We can give a few.
We'll talk internally on this one.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is IP is always challenging, so I think we'll give us some time. We'll get a response to this one as soon as we're able. And again, I think Zane put the link, but we do post the Q&A answers on the website. So in the RFP, it lists alloys of interest based on AM process. That said, would something like 718 or Ti-64 using wire arc be acceptable? Also, is there any interest in refractory alloys such as FS85?
On the first question, potentially yes. If there is a block of testing that needs to be done, or we've only done this in powder bed but haven't demonstrated in DAD, it can be considered in scope. For refractories, I will need to take that one and check with the sponsor.
Okay. All right, we've got more 7,000, 7XX replacements. Regarding the previous 7,000 replacements question, the Gotham call was referenced. The Gotham call is specifically focused on laser powder bed fusion technology. Would this Miami RFP negate interests in other AM processes beyond LPBF for 7,000 alloys?
No, those can be considered under this project call. Over.
Yeah, and just to follow up, if you go to page 7, there are specific bullet points in those situations where they call out the material or the process. Specifically, I'll give an example: copper nickel 7030 in LPBF or wire arc DED. So that's the third bullet point on page 7. If you have additional questions that come up after today on a specific material or process combination that isn't listed, please provide that so we can give you an answer on the website specifically. You can submit the questions on, Cole, can you put a link, an email address? I think it's Project Call at America Makes. Excellent. After the webinar, you can send questions to that email. We know they come up after. They must be submitted by a week from today, 5/19. That is the deadline. Train leaves the station after that. So please submit your questions by then. We have about 5 minutes left, so we can stay on a little bit longer, but appreciate you all attending today. Evan and my government colleagues, thank you for your support. I did see, I know we're at the end, I did see Kyle Cobb join, who is the resource sponsor for this. I don't know, Kyle, if you wanted to make a brief introduction. I know we only have a couple minutes left. If you're unable, no problem, but I just wanted to give you a chance to have the floor for a minute.
Thanks, Ben. My sincere apologies for joining late. I was having a fit of IT issues and I couldn't see or hear any of you. So as Ben mentioned, I am the resource sponsor for this particular effort. I am the deputy chair for the Joint Additive Manufacturing Working Group, or JAMWIG, that is led out of OUSW R&E's Manufacturing Technology Office. And this project was brought to us by our members who are looking to close a capability gap through the operationalization of additive within the Department of War. Over.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that. All right, and we have 2 more questions that came in. So, Evan, you're not off the hook yet. Are sinter-based AM techniques of interest?
I would say they can be considered.
Thank you. Does the first bullet of non-interest materials suggest that processes other than LPBF are acceptable in each of the materials listed in the first bullet?
They can be considered, correct.
Yeah, it's a good question. And for those that are on the call, we have done efforts, for example, before GAMAT, laser powder bed fusion Ti-64 was JMAD. And then we had GAMAT, which is blown powder DED for Ti-64. So that's why the second bullet exists. So we tried to give specific examples where work is either being done or already being funded and resourced in this area. So that's a good question. Bullet point 1 is specific to laser powder bed fusion. Correct. All right. Well, no other questions. We will go ahead and end the event 4 minutes early. And again, thank you all for attending. Thank you for your participation and good questions. We'll work to get these posted as soon as possible. And the website will be updated with the link to this video. It's usually by tonight, but it may be tomorrow. If you want to share it with your colleagues, feel free. And then lastly, if you have additional questions that come in after today, please submit them by May 19th to the project call at americamakes.us. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. And again, thank you for your participation.